We'd like to thank our collaborators. We'd like to thank the NIH Small Business Program, as well as some of our collaborators. The NCATS is pleased to host the NCI SBIR Development Center, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, and our collaborator, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. During our discussion today, our focus is to really help increase awareness about funding entrepreneurs and researchers, to help offer support to you as a small business owner, and to really support women and individuals from socially and disadvantaged businesses. The ultimate goal is to encourage and support your company to successfully apply for these programs. With that, I'd like to introduce our featured speakers. We'll have Carter Ashen. She is the EVP of Emerging Companies at Bio. Lily Portilla, the Director of Strategic Alliances at NCATS. Stephanie Furtick, Director at NIN Small Business Programs. And Patty Weber, Program Director at the SBIR Development Center at the National Cancer Institute. With that, I turn it over to Carter.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone at NIH for allowing Bio to participate in this very important webinar. Much like NIH, we here at Bio take very seriously our commitment and support for ensuring that women entrepreneurs are fully supported and continue to grow their voice and participation in biotechnology companies across the United States and the globe. As you can see, challenges still exist. So at least, if looking at large pharmaceutical companies, women currently only hold 16% of the senior management posts. And then looking further at emerging companies, particularly 10 companies that raised the most venture capital A rounds in 2014, presently only 17% were filled by women. Obviously, we can do better. That's why this webinar, though, is an important way to help provide information to women in the biotechnology field to ensure that they are utilizing fully access to important SBIR funding to help get their companies up and running and do important proof of concept tests to better attract venture capital. So looking at women that are applying for SBIR funding, the share of women-owned businesses submitting SBIR Phase 1 applications has increased slightly to 12.8% in FY 2014. And of Phase 2 respondents, 15% were identified as a female PI. But again, we can do better, and hopefully this webinar is a small step to helping ensure that we're providing the support to this community. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily. Thank you.
Thanks, Carter. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lily Portilla from the NCATS Office of Strategic Alliances. I'd like to go ahead and begin discussion on the SBIR STTR program here at the NIH. I will get into the differences between the two programs, but the purpose of these specific programs are to help entrepreneurial researchers launch businesses and also engage in R&D for new products that will have public benefit. SBIR and STTR, what are the key differences between the two programs? SBIR permits a research institution partners to collaborate with the small business concern. The small business can also outsource up to 33% of their Phase 1 activities and about up to 50% of their Phase 2 activities to academic researchers and other companies as well. And the PI must be primarily employed by the company. STTR works predominantly the same, although this does require that a research institution be a partner in the application. A minimum of 40% of the work should be conducted by the small business, and a minimum of 30% by a U.S. research institution. Here, the PI can be either employed by the company or the partnering research institution. And please keep in mind that the awards are always made to the small business. What are the benefits of the SBIR and STTR program? It is one of the largest funding sources of early-stage life sciences in the country. This is linked to R&D budgets across the federal agencies, so it's stable and predictable. IP rights are retained by the small business. It is not a loan and a non-dilutive capital. And I think one of the key important reasons is that your projects go through the rigorous NIH scientific peer review process, which our grantees can use to leverage that scientific review to attract funding and other collaborations as well, validating their science. The NIH SBIR STTR funding is a set-aside that's mandated by Congress. And as you can see here, the current set-aside across all the federal agencies is 3% for SBIR and 0.45% for STTR. And again, in terms of what we're talking about funding across the NIH for the program, the NIH total budget is about $31 billion, and $800 million of that is set aside specifically for small businesses under the SBIR and STTR. So I'd like to go over provide an overview of the funding that we provide for this program and the types of ways that you can apply. I'll go through our standard solicitation process, which we call the omnibus solicitation, which covers all of the NIH institutes as well as our sister organizations, the FDA and the CDC. And then I'll talk about direct to phase 2, and then mention a little bit about targeted grant solicitations. And we also, some of the institutes here at the NIH participate not only in the grant solicitations, soliciting for grants, but also for contracts. And that is on a different solicitation process than the grants. So when we talk about SBIR and STTR, we talk about phase 1 and phase 2. And just to be clear, this has nothing to do with an FDA designation of a phase 1 or phase 2 trial. They're just separated into a phase 1, which is typically studies that are done, feasibility studies, and then the phase 2, which is more full R&D development that happens. The budgets are different between these two phases. The guidelines across the agencies is $150K for 6 months. However, here at the NIH, we do have a hard cap of $225,000 for 1 to 2 years for a phase 1, and $1.5 million for a phase 2 and the grant can last anywhere between 1 year to 3 years. When we talk about a fast track application, what we mean here is that you apply for not only the phase 1, but you also apply for the phase 2, so it's a combined application that has the feasibility and the full R&D application. There are milestone aims in the phase 1 that will be assessed by the program before you can move to the phase 2, but you do not have to reapply for that phase 2 since you've already applied for the entire phase 1 and phase 2 under the fast track. So that's when we talk about a fast track program, that's what that is. Then we also have a direct to phase 2, and this is a program or another mechanism that we have. For instance, when a small business has enough data that they have gathered under other sources, and they can move directly into the phase 2 program, apply for a phase 2 and start the full R&D work. That's called a direct to phase 2. And we have listed here the funding announcements that these programs that you can apply under these programs. Just want to make sure that everyone understands that not all NIH institutes participate in this program, so it's very important that you read the particular funding announcements that we have outlined here. In terms of who's eligible for applying for an SBIR and a STTR, let's talk specifically about an SBIR. The criteria for applying is that it must be a U.S. business with 500 or fewer employees. The PI's primary employment must be with the small business at the time of award and during the entire project period. More than 50% is U.S. owned by individuals and independently operated, or more than 50% owned and controlled by other business concern that is greater than 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals, or more than 50% owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, private equity firms, or a combination of these. I think if there's ever any doubt as to what the eligibility is, the NIH website has a fair amount of information, and also you can go on the SBA website in order to learn more about what the different designations are in terms of the ownership piece here for SBIR. For STTR, there has to be an established cooperative research and development effort where, as I said earlier, a minimum of 40% by the small business and a minimum of 30% by a U.S. college or university or nonprofit institution, as well as a federally funded R&D center. There must be a formalized IP agreement between so that we know that the IP rights, for instance, from the university can be worked on under the small business. So there needs to be, at the time of award, proof that their formalized IP agreement exists. And again, the primary employment of the principal investigator here can be either with the small business or with the U.S. research institution. What is a woman-owned business? And when you see this designation, what exactly does it mean? It's a firm that must be at least 51% owned and controlled by one or more women and primarily managed by one or more women who must be U.S. citizens. A firm must be small in its primary industry in accordance with the SBA size standards, which was, I said earlier, 500 employees or less. And the small business concern, the woman-owned small business concern needs to self-certify that in their SF424 form, which is your application form here in applying for grants under this specific program. For socially disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged businesses, it's the same thing. Here, again, you must also self-certify by registering your business with the System of Award Management, which is something I'll get into later, but this is a specific database that you must register in order to receive any kind of grant or contract from the government, not only NIH, but any federal agency. So let's talk about current funding opportunities. The majority of grants at the NIH come in under what's called our omnibus solicitation. Here are the recent solicitations that were just released in May. And we encourage small businesses to look at the specific funding announcement, but also read what's called the program description and research topics. It's a very copious document that has every possible topic that the NIH is looking for, divided by institute, and as well, it also talks about what our sister agencies such as the CDC and FDA are looking for. There are standard deadlines here. They typically are September 5th, January 5th, and April 5th. If there's a holiday, sometimes the dates get shifted a little bit, but these you can expect that these are the standard submission dates under the omnibus solicitation. And again, there are also specific program announcements. I think it's important that you also, aside from looking at the omnibus, focus on specific announcements that may be perfectly tailored for the type of technology or research area that you are working on. Some of these are listed as RFAs, which means that there's a set aside specifically for that a topic in a specific institute. Look and see who's participating. Sometimes, as you can see here, they're issued by a particular organization, but there may be multiple institutes at the NIH that are participating in the funding announcement. So look at that very carefully to see who's participating and also what is covered under the specific funding announcement. I'll get into some tips and tools for a successful application. Just a quick overview of what we look for SBIR and STTRs here, and what the review criteria is. As you can see here, they range, they're scored individually in this area of significance. The investigator, PI team, innovation, is it something new, novel, or an improvement upon something that's already out there? You'll be also reviewed on your approach that you're taking and the research design of the proposal, as well as what facilities will be used to get the research conducted. There's additional review criteria that we look at as well, but they're not scored individually, and that's having to do with the protection of human subjects, inclusion of women, minorities, and children in some of the research studies that you may be doing under these proposals, animal studies, and also any discussion on biohazardous material that will be used in the context of the proposal, the grant proposal. Here are the deadlines, and I want to give you an idea of how long this process takes. If you're looking at an SBIR STTR to fill a short-term gap, it's probably not the right program to apply to. So as a matter of example, if you submitted at our next submission date, which is April 5th, we would expect this to be reviewed through scientific review between the months of October and November. We would have a priority score at that point, and you would know what the application is scored. These applications must be here at the NIH reviewed by our respective institutional advisory councils, and that would usually happen, for instance, again, if you're filing and if you're submitting in September, in the January, February time frame. And the earliest that we would expect for folks to get an award if they submitted in September would be March. So you can see that there is a bit of a lag time by the time of submission to the time where there's an actual award made. One of the best tips I can give applicants that here at the NIH is look at your, as I said, look at the funding announcement, make sure that you are eligible to apply for the funding announcement and that the focused area does align with what you're trying to accomplish under the grant. And again, we take applications in under the omnibus, but again, look at the very specific topics that are out there that are very focused in terms of institutional priorities here at the NIH. We encourage all applicants, if they have questions, to contact the NIH program officer, which is also listed on all of the funding announcements in terms of who you need to talk to. I can't stress this enough that no question is silly. This is what we're here for. We're here to help you and answer questions, especially for first-time submitters. Feel free to talk to us, and I think the best way to engage in a conversation is share with us what you want to do, perhaps under a non-confidential abstract, in order to get feedback about whether the application is suitable for a specific institute or a funding announcement, and I think that's a great way to get the conversation going with your program officer. I also can't stress this enough, submit early. This is a program that takes, you put a lot of effort into putting an application, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen applications not being able to get submitted because registrations were not done in a timely manner, and that was the rate limiting step in getting the application into the NIH. We also have this new tool called NIH Assist, which is also supposed to help streamline the application process, and we encourage our applicants to look at that because it does kind of walk you through the submission process, really important for first-time submitters. When I talked about the registrations that you have to do, we encourage you to at least 4 to 6 weeks before the submission date to go ahead to make sure that you have a proper DUNS number, that you're registered in the system for award management, which we call the SAM system, and you have an account in grants.gov and ERA Commons, and that you've also registered done your SBA registration as well too. All these things are critical and essential in order for you to apply to the NIH. Common application problems that we see have to do around the review. For instance, reviewers believe that your proposal is not really solving a problem, or that you have not made a significant case in terms of why the technology has commercial potential or an impact on patient health. Also, lack of innovation. A lot of this program is seeing new innovation, improvement upon things that are already out there, and we want to see what that is, what the novelness of what you bring under the application is. We need a focused research plan, again, commensurate with what the budget limitations are. Make sure that you are consistent with what would one expect under a phase 1 grant. Too much work that isn't covered under the budget, that will not, you probably will not do well in review. I think another thing is to make sure that you consider the potential pitfalls and alternatives of what you're proposing, and also be very familiar with what the relevant published work is. And again, I mentioned this earlier, be realistic about what you can accomplish under these grants. So important facts to remember, eligibility is determined at the time of award. If you haven't gotten your eligibility as to whether you're a small business, but maybe you haven't been able to accomplish that at the time of submission, but if you are going to be awarded the grant, we would not be able to award you any money until that eligibility is done. So it's important that at least at the time of award that is addressed. The PI is not required to necessarily have a PhD or MD, but I will say that if you're going to be doing some clinical research, we want to see that you have partnered with the right clinician in order to get the clinical trial done. So we are going to look at your team that you've assembled to get the work that you're proposing under the grant very carefully. The PI is also required to have expertise to oversee the project scientifically and technically. Applications may be submitted to different federal agencies for similar work to support different aims and objectives, and awards may not be accepted from different agencies for duplicative projects. And I will stress that this does get looked at. Just because you applied to NSF for a similar project that overlaps with the one that you submitted to the NIH, that's going to be reconciled at some point. So we take that very seriously. And I'm going to, again, stress the importance of, if you don't do well the first time, and I'll say that if you're a first-timer, sometimes you will have to resubmit the application. Don't let your initial score dissuade you from resubmitting. It's important that you really look at those reviewer comments and incorporate them into your resubmission. Talk to your program officer. And again, no, there are no stupid questions. We really want to hear from you. Ask us, and if I don't know the answer, I involve my grants management folks. I will find you the answer, at least a place that you can find your answer. After reviewing the summary statement, really look at it and see how you can improve your application. And again, we are here to assist you to do this. I'll talk about a few additional SBIR and STTR resources that exist here at the NIH. There are a couple of technical assistance programs that we have here available to our grantees. One of those is the Niche Assessment Program, which is available to Phase 1 awardees. It helps you develop a market entry strategy, determines your competitive advantage, and you can apply to that to that program here. We also have the Commercialization Acceleration Program that is run through a contractor here that we have called LARDA, and this is for Phase 2 awardees. And here they kind of help you with the strategic and business planning aspect of your small business, what FDA requirements you may need in order to move the technology forward, address any kind of manufacturing issue and IP and licensing issues as well too. Helps you build strategic alliances, and the idea here is to facilitate partnerships with strategic partnerships, but also try to get investor partnerships as well too. We also have, I talked about Phase 1 and Phase 2. We also have some of the institutes participate in what's called a Phase 2B program, which is kind of a bridge between, after your Phase 2 to get you to, some, for instance, some pivotal clinical study that needs to get done. And here, I will say that not all institutes participate in this program, and there are different stipulations by individual institute in terms of what and who they will fund under the Phase 2B program. So again, look at the funding announcement, particularly the omnibus that talks about this, but note that there is this additional phase that we here fund as well too at the NIH. And that could be up to $3 million for up to 3 years that's done under the Phase 2B. There's also the Commercialization Readiness this is a pilot program, and there are 2 funding announcements here that provide technical assistance. As you can see, not all NIH institutes are participating, but for instance, an applicant can use this program to do, for instance, a patent landscape on their IP. They could try to get funds to help defray those costs, any kind of regulatory assistance, maybe a key, like a talk study in order to get you the data that you need to move you to the next phase. So it's a really interesting pilot that's being run here, and again, we encourage you to look at these 2 funding announcements. Again, not all the institutes here at the NIH are participating, and there are different dollar amounts for under these 2 funding announcements that we have listed here. And by all means, contact your NIH program staff to discuss this particular program. Then I'd like to also mention that here at the NIH, we have been collaborating with our colleagues at the National Science Foundation under the I Corps program, which is an entrepreneurial immersion program. And we have aimed this program to our Phase 1 grantees. There is a funding announcement that has come out twice a year that allows Phase 1 grantees to apply to this training program. And it's wonderful, and I encourage folks to go on the NIH website, Google NIH SBIR I Corps to learn more about this. But this is it's based on the Lean Launchpad model that Steve Blank developed out in the West Coast, and NSF has also various I Corps nodes through the country. And again, it's a very intensive entrepreneurial immersion program that we think our Phase 1 grantees very much benefit from. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Stephanie Furtick.
Great. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi, my name is Stephanie Furtick, and I manage the small business program at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And, I think Lily did a great job of walking through the overall SBIR STTR programs. And one of the things and one of the reasons why it's so important to contact your program officer is because each institute runs their program a little bit differently. So if you want to think about it, we're all the states of the United States are part of the federal government, but each of them has their own state government. California is run a little bit differently than Texas, which is a little bit different from Maine. So in a lot of ways, the institutes are a lot like that. And so each of us has kind of different opportunities and different policies and different ways we run things. And I think you saw a little bit of that when we were talking about, what we participate in. Some of us participate in I Corps, some of us don't. Some of us are part of the Commercialization Readiness Pilot, some of us aren't. So I want to talk a little bit today about some of the opportunities that NINDS has. Now, we use a variety of translational approaches to bring things from discovery all the way through to small clinical trials. And I am not going to go in depth today, but this is certainly all available on our website, which you see at the bottom of the slide here. And so please either contact me, go to the website, do a little bit of both, and I'd be happy to assist you or answer any questions that you may have. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Epilepsy Therapy Screening Program, or ETSP. Now, this isn't necessarily an SBIR-specific program, but it's open to small businesses and really provides a resource to small businesses, academia, industry at no cost. And what we do is we take compounds, potential compounds that may be, could be potentially used for epilepsy, run them through a battery of preclinical models of epilepsy, and we give you the data and then talk to you about next steps. So these compounds are run at an NINDS contract site, University of Utah. To date, we've screened tens of thousands of compounds. This has had a role in 10 marketed drugs since 1990. It's a successful program. If you think you have a compound that could potentially be used for epilepsy, please let us know. This service is here. It's got a very quick turnaround, and it's at no cost. So one of the interesting things about the SBIR, so that's some of our earlier stage stuff that we have for small businesses beyond the small business program. But what's interesting about the small business program is that it's a congressionally mandated set-aside, and often we will have small business program announcements as part of larger programs, meaning that the small business program, really think of it as a set-aside and not necessarily, it is its own program, but we sometimes utilize that. It can be part of other programs. So for example, the 3 translational programs that I've highlighted here all have a small business component, and they also have a program announcement for academics and non-small businesses. So that's something to look for. Sometimes programs will have something special for small businesses embedded in them. Now, these 3 programs are specifically made to bring things from the discovery phase all the way through to small clinical trials. And these are cooperative agreements. That means they're milestone-driven. And while they may have a larger amount of money, you'll see in these program announcements, often we will give more money than in a standard small business grant. You have to meet those milestones, or we can decrease funding. So we have one for each different modality. So for the first modality I want to talk about is for devices. This is specifically to take therapeutic devices, again, from non-clinical work all the way through to the clinic. We have 3 different pathways, depending upon how you'll be going through the FDA, whether it's a 510K, PMA, HDE, or you just need to finalize your device design. And I've highlighted in red those program announcements that are specific for small business. We also have a translational program. This is another CREATE program, a translational program for biologics. And this is to take and fund those biologics and biotechnology products and bring them to the clinic. And there are 2 tracks here. There's a discovery track, which has an end goal of characterizing and selecting a lead compound, and then a development track with the end goal of submitting an IND or even potentially moving into a small clinical trial. And again, we have small business components for this as well. Now, we also have the Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Network for small molecules, and this program is unique in that it combines both grant funding and access to resources. So you get some grant funding to do bioactivity efficacy studies, but then you get access to all the CROs that you see here to do MedChem, all the way through to the phase 1 clinical trials. In addition, you get access to consultants, and these are industry-seasoned consultants that can help guide you through the development process. So this is a really neat program. What's interesting about this, it's not just confined to NINDS. It actually encompasses a number of different institutes that are involved in neuroscience. So it is something to look at, even if you don't quite fit in the mission of the NINDS, which is specifically looking at neuroscience and neurological diseases. This specific announcement includes things such as mental health, some things that might fall under the Eye Institute, the Deafness Institute, etc. So finally, we do also support clinical trials, and small businesses we do support clinical studies and clinical trials through the small business program, but we do it in a little bit of a different way than some of the other institutes. So while clinical research, such as diagnostics, are accepted through the general SBIR STTR solicitations, clinical trials are only accepted through specific program announcements. Now, a clinical trial is considered something that is using you've got to be developing a therapeutic or something that actually that isn't a diagnostic or isn't looking for the definition is and I'm losing the word now. It's kind of interesting, so my apologies, but it's got to be a therapeutic, or you have to be treating the disease or disorder. You have to be changing an outcome for a clinical trial. So we allow clinical trials through the specific programs you see here, as well as in our clinical trials networks. And these two networks, again, have small business components. They're great. They have centralized IRBs, and those centralized IRBs allow these clinical trials to really be set up a lot more quickly than if you're trying to do a multi-center clinical trial without that. Finally, we've talked a lot about therapeutics and things that are helpful that kind of move those therapeutics to the clinic, but the small business program can do a lot more than that, and it can certainly support things that are non-therapeutic focused. So just briefly touching on the BRAIN initiative, so this is a presidential initiative that is through not just the NIH, but it's a partnership amongst all the federal agencies you see here, as well as the foundations and institutes that are listed. And its goal is really to develop new technologies for mapping connections of discovering patterns of neural activity and using those technologies to understand neural circuits, and then hopefully leading to new therapies. So developing new technologies fits squarely within the space of the SBIR program. And so if you want new funding opportunities are located right here on the website, and they do come out. They tend to be 1 or 2 time calls, so they do kind of come out in a bolus, generally in the fall. So there aren't many there right now, but certainly stay tuned. But the one that is there right now is for small businesses, and that's really to develop some of these tools and technologies for neuroscience research. Yes, these are small markets, but that's okay. We're interested in developing these new technologies. And if you're interested in this, or you have a new research tool that you're thinking about developing through the small business program, please reach out and talk to us. And so with that, I just want to point out before we jump to the NCI, we are part of a number of those different initiatives that they were talking about, I Corps, C3I, a number of different investor opportunities. My comment to you is I often send out these emails, and we send out these emails to awardees, and I'm often surprised at how few people take advantage of these free resources. Take advantage of them. They're there for you. They're underutilized. Please take advantage of these if you're an awardee. They're there for a reason, and we're here to help you. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Patty.
Thank you, Stephanie. This is Patty Weber from the NCI SBIR Development Center. Thank you. So we are a group of 9 program directors. We all work with Michael Weingarten, our director, and we've got Christy Canaria, who's a program manager, and she also manages the I Corps program at NIH along with Michael, and Corey Hallett, who is a AAAS fellow in our office. And we are all here to help you. As everybody has been stating, please contact us. We all have specific areas of expertise, some of us broader than others, but we can all answer your questions about the program and how it would fit in, how your idea would fit into NCI's mission. So this is just an example of one of our women-owned businesses that has been funded through our program. Dr. Hazelhurst started at Moffitt Cancer Center and has now moved up to West Virginia University, but she's an academic as well as a researcher. So she came into the program via the STTR mechanism and has successfully received several Phase 1 and Phase 2 awards. And another company that has been successful is based out in California in Silicon Valley, Cellsite Technologies. And they've also been successful through, I believe, through our contract program. So we, as everybody has mentioned, there are the grants and contracts. I will say most of our opportunities are through the omnibus solicitation, but we've got grants and contracts, and I'm going to cover that in the next few slides. But I just want to mention that in my portfolio, I cover a lot of digital health. In fact, most of the digital health awards that come from NCI. And I'll say in this area, I speak with a lot of women entrepreneurs, and I'm very excited when I get to talk with them. And I think there's a lot of great up-and-coming small businesses out there that are just now finding out about the SBIR and STTR programs. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing some good applications coming in from these young women. So at NCI, this is basically the division of our funded portfolio. Right now, the majority of our funding on the grant side and contracts, I would say, goes to therapeutics at 39%, followed by in vitro diagnostics and imaging, and that's imaging agents. And then the imaging devices would be covered under devices for cancer therapy. We also fund tools for basic research in cancer. And then, as I mentioned, we do have a digital health or health IT portfolio, and that includes any software tool that epidemiology research, you name it. So really our mission is very broad, and it covers the whole spectrum of cancer from prevention, early detection, diagnostic, biomarker research, to therapeutic, to survivorship issues, and all the way to end-of-life issues. And you can see from this slide here on the right, we have a certain percentage of our portfolio that goes to cover R&D contracts, and that it's varied from 24% to as high as 35% in fiscal year 2013. So every year we put out anywhere from 12 to as many as 22 contract topics, and those topics will be coming out very soon, I believe toward the end of July, so look for that announcement. It covers NCI as well as CDC and FDA, so be sure to check to see what different NIH institutes are looking for in terms of these targeted solicitations. So I'm just going to cover a little bit here the difference between contracts and grants. So as you can see highlighted in this table, most of the SBIR grants that come into, at least to the NCI, are investigator initiated and come in through the omnibus solicitation. But these contract topics, they are defined narrowly by the NIH. And so that's a major difference, is we define specifically what we're looking for and then you have to figure out if your technology can address that question that the NIH Institute is posing. And regarding speaking to program during the solicitation period, it's allowed at any time with grants. But with contracts, you must contact the contracting officer. And your questions can be of an administrative nature or a technical nature. And if they are of a technical nature, the contracting officer will go to the appropriate program officer to get that technical question addressed. And then the answers are shared with the community. So this has to be an open and fair solicitation. So that information is usually put out as a frequently asked question. And as I mentioned with the omnibus, and as my colleagues have mentioned, the receipt dates are 3 times a year. And with contracts, it's only once per year. And it is going to be coming up toward the end of July, with a receipt date generally at the end of October or early November. And peer review is a little bit different also between grants and contracts. Grants are reviewed at NIH through the Center for Scientific Review, or CSR, and at NCI, the contracts are reviewed by internally. DEA is for our Division of Extramural Activities, and with our NCI reviews, the program generally works with our scientific review officers to try to ensure that we get at least 50% of the reviewers that are coming from the outside. These are outside experts. But we want to see that at least 50% of those reviewers are from businesses. And so the basis for the awards, there's a peer review score that's given for grants. And there's also a score, but it's a different scale that's given for contracts. But the difference with contracts is then we can negotiate with the offerer or the small business about these technical deliverables. So based on the review, we may go back to the company and ask for a response to some of the concerns and how might they change specific technical deliverables based on the reviewer's concerns. And then in terms of reporting, with grants, it's generally just one final report for phase 1 and an annual report for phase 2s. And with contracts, we always have a kickoff presentation, we have quarterly progress reports, and a final report that includes a final commercialization plan for taking the product to the market. And there currently there's in general no specific set aside for grants unless it's a targeted solicitation, a grant solicitation. But regarding contracts, we do set aside a specific portion of the budget for each contract topic that we solicit a response to. And I'll just say that if we don't get any good responses and we don't fund, then the monies that we set aside for contracts go back into the general grant fund pool. And in regards to program staff involvement, it tends to be on the lower side for grants, but I won't say that's the case for in all situations. But on the contract side, it has to be higher, and that's because of contract law. And so our role as project officers is to be involved with the companies and reviewing these reports, going back to them if we need more information, and to make sure that everything that was proposed and awarded in a contract, and that it was met. And so for the current fiscal year that we're in, so these are contract topics that were published last year in July. So this is just an example. I won't go through them all, but it really covers a very broad spectrum that represents pretty much our entire portfolio, from digital health to therapeutics to devices to diagnostics. So again, I encourage you to take a look at that when it comes out. And one other thing that we do at NCI is we try to connect our companies with investors so that you have the follow-on funding that you need to make it all the way to commercialization. And then one mechanism that we've had for that is we've conducted our own investor forums. We take applications from all our funded companies, and we have outside specialists, outside investor-type reviewers, look at those applications, and we select companies and then showcase them at a physical event. And the last 3 were in the Silicon Valley at Agilent Technologies, our first one we did in Boston. But these have been very successful events in connecting our companies with investors. And another thing that we're actually doing right now is they're called Innovation Showcase Partnerships. So rather than putting on the event ourselves, we're working with other organizations that have their own investor forums. For example, Bio, Angel Capital Association, Resi. So these are organizations that we work with and develop a contract with our companies go through the same process of applying, and we have outside reviewers, and then those that are selected, we work with these individual investor forums, and they will showcase a set number of NIH selected companies. And the last thing that we've done here, 2 of these now, we've had a workshop on federal resources to accelerate commercialization. So we bring together different parts of the federal government agencies that can help our companies to develop and get their technology all the way to the market. We've had speakers from FDA, CMS, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, White House, and during this 2-day meeting, we also allowed the companies to meet one-on-one with their program director as well as the speakers. And the last one we did was here in Shady Grove, NCI's office at Shady Grove in May 24th and 25th. It was very successful. And I just want to point you all to our website at sbir.cancer.gov. You can find out any information that you need to know about NCI's funding, our portfolio, programs. We've got resources to help you, any upcoming events. You can go there and sign up to get email updates as to when we have new funding announcements or when contract topics come out. And all of our contact information is there on the website as well. I believe that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar today. We wanted to also just send a reminder that we are accepting questions through the question feature on the right-hand side. We have received a great many, which we'll go through shortly. And also, please stay on the line to be able to participate in an online feedback forum. We do value what you share with us and adjust our programs based on that. With that said, I'll go to our first question. Is a high score on an application good or bad? And what should we do if we don't get accepted the first time? Do others reapply once they take into account the feedback?
A high numerical score let me put it this way. It's a lower score is much more competitive. And if you, for instance, get some initial feedback from the review folks that they didn't score the application or it was a high scoring application and the institute's not going to fund it, by all means use the summary statement as a way to improve upon the application to resubmit. And you can look at that summary statement as somewhat of a roadmap to get you to improve upon your application. And again, talk to your program officer as well too about ways of improving the application, about resubmitting, which we very much encourage.
The next question is for Stephanie at NIMS. Can you please talk more about the feasibility criteria for Phase 1 SBIR?
Can you repeat that? Because you were a little bit quiet. So the Phase 1 feasibility criteria?
Right.
For an SBIR. Okay. So, and I guess this comes out a lot, which is, what is a Phase 1 versus what is a Phase 2, and how do we define feasibility? The NIH actually defines feasibility. It has a fairly flexible definition for feasibility. So one person's feasibility study is another person's further research and development. And so we're fairly flexible as well, and that's why we have program announcements that have, you can submit a fast track that's all a clinical trial, or those translational grants that I was talking about. They're fast track grants, and the Phase 1 is the non-clinical work, and the Phase 2 is the clinical work. You could argue those are fairly late stage, but the feasibility study there is the non-clinical work. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but really think, don't get too caught up in, oh, this isn't a Phase 1, or I don't think this is a Phase 1. Reach out and talk to us. It's actually probably a more flexible definition than you think.
The next question is for Lily at NCATS. Are there any set-aside funds for women-owned businesses?
So, no, there are not set-aside funding the designation of woman-owned business is used to help us track who's applying to the program, and to also do outreach like we're doing now here in this webinar. So that's not how the designation is used. Having said that, I don't want to diminish the importance of, if you are a woman-owned business, about making sure that you have that designation in your application.
I would also add that there are benefits to the Small Business Administration.
Yeah, by all means, they may have separate programs through the SBA, and we encourage, of course, everyone to look at as many of these programs that are out there. I will add that into the federal contracting, this is separate from SBIR and STTR. Federal contracts as well sometimes may have a set aside for women in disadvantaged businesses too. Important to look at that, but that's very contract and agency specific, but I'll put it out there.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is for Patty. Can you talk more about the composition of review committees and what that's like, and whether they have a commercial and drug development expertise?
Well, there are special study sections for each technology area. And so in the area of drug development, I would definitely say that there are two main study sections for drug development that come into NCI. But this is at the Center for Scientific Review. So they review applications for the other institutes as well. And I will say that I would, on average, I think about 3/4 are academic reviewers, but I always tell people to go to the website for the Center for Scientific Review and look at the specific study section, and you can go back to 3 or 4 different meetings and you can look at the composition of that section. And it does vary. So I would say, though, on average, maybe those 3/4 are academic reviewers, with the other reviewers being from industry. When we work with our NCI reviewers for contracts, we do try to get that to be closer to 50% of the reviewers from industry, both small business and large business. Did that answer the question?
Thank you. Yeah. The next question is for Stephanie. Can you talk more about the prep work needed to have your systems in place before submitting an application, particularly around registration with the DUNS and other entities that they need to register with?
Oh, absolutely. And as Lily noted, I think this is something that catches a lot of people off guard, particularly those new awardees. And every time there's a receipt date, there's at least one person, usually more, who miss the receipt date because of those registrations. So, if you have not been to it already, I would strongly encourage you to go to the NIH website, which is SBIR.nih.gov. Don't put the www in front of it. It doesn't work. But SBIR.nih.gov, there is a button that says New to SBIR. Click the button. What's great about that is it's got a flow chart of all the steps and how to apply, and that includes, if you click on it, there's a little section about registration with all the links to all the different registrations that you need. The problem is it's not that they're difficult, but they can take time. So that's why it's important to start them early. I always tell people, basically, if somebody doesn't have the registrations and I'm talking to them, I say the first job is to get off the phone with me and immediately start doing the registrations. So really, they're not difficult. They just take time to process, and what you don't want is to have a situation where you're waiting for them to process at the very last minute, at the 11th hour, hoping they go through so you can submit your grant application. So that's the big thing. So you can find more information about all those registrations, as I said, at the SBIR.nih.gov website.
Thank you. So I'm getting a question about whether people should focus on getting some of the ideas patented before filling out an application, since some of the information from the application may be viewable to the public. What do you have to say about that, Lily?
I think when you're sharing, first of all, if you're sharing your idea for us and want to run by the whether it's appropriate for NIH. I always think it's advise folks to provide a non-confidential abstract of what you would like to propose under the grant. And I think in terms of whether you should file a patent at the time of submitting an award, I might argue that you should have that conversation with your patent attorney or an IP expert maybe in your particular area to decide what the timing is appropriate. I will say that the applications that are made available to the public, including the abstracts, are the ones that are awarded. Unawarded applications will not be made public, but if you are going to have an application awarded, the abstract will be put on one of our public databases, which is called the NIH Reporter, and that is visible to everyone that searches that database.
But Lily, this is Stephanie. Just to clarify, your application is not made public. And in fact, your application is not considered a public disclosure, my understanding anyway, keeping in mind, here's my little tiny fine print. I am not an IP attorney, but it's not considered a public disclosure. We do require that reviewers sign confidentiality agreements with us. However, just keep in mind that you are putting it in the grant, and often people feel you should talk to your attorney and determine what makes the most sense for you and your company.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thanks for making the clarification. It is the abstract, and the title of it is out there. So, again, seek some advice on the best strategy for your particular IP.
We're getting some questions about SBIR and STTR. Which program has more funding, and is there a greater success in either?
The SBIR line has more funding in it. I think I had provided, I think it was 3%. The STTR is 0.45, and I think in terms of success rates, it depends across the different ICs. Stephanie's may be very different. Stephanie's at NINDS and NCI's may be very different from mine versus for the STTR line. Do you guys want to elaborate on that piece? Any NINDS or NCI?
Patty, NCI, I'll just say that the success rate is about the same right now, and our priority score cutoff is identical, but we see far fewer applications coming into the STTR program than we do the SBIR. So some years STTR can be more successful than SB. It really does vary, so that's a hard question to answer definitively.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's actually the case with us as well. I mean, we're usually roughly looking at the same score range, and usually it's roughly the same, percentage that we award, but we get far fewer STTRs to the STTR, applications to the STTR program. And it can fluctuate from year to year because the budget for STTRs is smaller. I think we just see more fluctuation because you get a couple of really large applications that score very well, and it can skew your results for a couple of years. So it's just that's why maybe it's a little bit more difficult. But if you look across all of NIH and that data is available, they're roughly equivalent.
Thank you. So we are running out of time, but we do have some questions that have commonality. There is a question about there are a variety of institutes on the call today, and how does one know whether their application would be appropriate for another? One example is if there's a brain tumor application technology, should they send that to NINS or to NCI? So I will ask Stephanie and Patty to jump in there.
Patty, we fund an awful lot in the area of treating glioblastoma and brain tumors at NCI, so it would certainly be appropriate and fit our mission. And it is one of those shared areas of interest between the two of us, and this is a great point to make as we're wrapping up here, is that sometimes there are things that are shared areas of interest between two institutes. And if you reach out to us ahead of time, we have kind of agreements so that we don't
I like to say it's not that NINDS or NIH or NCI isn't interested in a specific topic, but we figure out who's going to cover what so we don't step on each other's toes. So we can, if you send us the rough specific aims or an idea of what you're thinking about proposing, we can say, hey, based on what you've written there, we think that this institute is probably going to get assigned your application, not the other institute. Because remember, when you apply, you're applying to NIH as a whole, and then you get assigned to an institute. So we can see which assignment you're likely to get, and that will help you, guide you to who you should talk to next.
But Stephanie, just for clarification, if you're applying to a specific funding announcement for a specific institute, that will go to that institute, right?
That's correct. Although if it's, sometimes if it's not within the mission, so we've had situations where we had a specific program announcement, somebody applied to it, turns out they actually didn't fall within our mission, we will, if it's possible, transfer you to another program announcement.
Right.
And move you to another institute, because we don't generally fund, even if you come in under a program announcement that say only NINDS, if it's not within our mission, we're not going to accept it.
And I'll add that this is one of those situations where the community talks to each other a lot. So we're not 27 independent silos in this area. We're working together to assist the applicants as best we can.
That's exactly right.
So I will also note that we are getting questions about specific project ideas. We'd like to move to the contact information and let you know that you can contact each of the IC contacts to get more information. We have Lily and Stephanie's information, and then for NCI, Corey and Patty, you can reach them. Take a look at that first bar there. You can get those email addresses. And if you have a project idea or a question, please do feel free to contact them. We will make the slides available, and we appreciate your time here today. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.